Hola, buenos días a todos. ¿Qué tal? Bueno, ya son las 11:30. Vamos a empezar este webinar. Lo primero, daros las gracias a todos los que estáis conectados ahora para atenderlo. Para los que no me conocéis, mi nombre es Natacha Lerma, responsable del área de negocio de investigación de mercados y consultoría para Toluna en España y Portugal. Y estoy aquí con nuestra vicepresidenta de Data Quality para Toluna en Europa. Y bueno, vamos a empezar a compartir, voy a compartir la pantalla con vosotros, vamos a empezar a compartir, a hablar sobre este tema que creo que es realmente fundamental e interesante para todos los profesionales de investigación, sobre todo dirigido a la investigación online. Voy a compartir la pantalla y empezamos. Un segundito que voy con ello. Ok. Nuestro principal objetivo de hoy es, sobre todo, pues plantear de alguna manera estas tendencias y estos cambios que estamos observando en la investigación de mercados online y, sobre todo, referido a lo que es una cuestión fundamental, que es la calidad de los datos, ¿vale? Entonces, aquí tenemos un poco la agenda de hoy, ¿vale? Este webinar durará aproximadamente unos 45 minutos en los que nos vamos a enfocar en la situación actual que estamos afrontando los profesionales de la investigación online, sobre todo, en cuanto a la calidad y, bueno, cómo hemos llegado, ¿no? En qué punto estamos y cómo hemos llegado hasta aquí. También los retos que nos estamos encontrando en cuanto a la gestión correcta y adecuada de la calidad de los datos, de los resultados que obtenemos a través de la investigación online. Y, por último, qué habilidades, Marie nos va a comentar, bueno, qué perfiles profesionales y qué habilidades son las que necesitamos en el ámbito de la investigación para abordar estos retos que nos estamos encontrando hoy y también en cuanto a el corto plazo, ¿no? El futuro, en cuanto a cómo vamos a abordar este asunto, que es, pues, como venimos diciendo, la calidad de los datos. Primeramente, empezaré haciendo una pequeña introducción para aquellos que no conocen Toluna o no han tenido la oportunidad de estar en contacto con nosotros antes. Toluna básicamente se basa en 3 pilares fundamentales, ¿vale? Voy a empezar por uno que es crucial para nosotros, que es la tecnología. Toluna es una compañía que basa su investigación en la evolución constante de la tecnología para hacer investigación online. Es una empresa, una compañía con claro ADN tecnológico y también básicamente enfocada en la innovación y en las soluciones digamos, de último momento para desarrollar investigación online. A partir de aquí, ¿cómo hacemos para llegar o para cubrir la investigación que hacemos? Lo hacemos a través de nuestro panel global. Es una comunidad de opinión social con un alcance global en más de 70 países. Tenemos la capacidad de llegar a más de 72 millones de personas alrededor del mundo, y todo esto combinado, por supuesto, con la experiencia en investigación y el servicio que ofrecemos. De alguna manera, lo que buscamos principalmente es ofrecer los mejores servicios de investigación de mercados, por supuesto, y también ofrecemos servicios de consultoría personalizada para cuando sea necesario, pues, abordar diferentes retos dentro de la investigación de nuestros clientes. Vamos a hablar muy brevemente, aunque yo creo que la mayoría de los que estamos aquí las conocemos bien, pero es importante, ¿no? Tener en cuenta qué ventajas nos aporta la investigación de mercados online. Sabemos que cada metodología tiene, pues, por supuesto, sus fortalezas, también sus debilidades, y en este caso, pues, la metodología online pues es de la misma manera, ¿no? No es una excepción. En este contexto, ¿no? En el contexto de la calidad de los datos también, pues es importante recordar ventajas de la investigación online. La primera y muy importante, hemos hablado de ese alcance global que tienen nuestros paneles, ¿no? La escalabilidad, el poder acceder a una audiencia amplia, global, incluyendo además no solo la amplitud, sino la especificidad de diferentes grupos objetivo, targets más nicho, más específicos que se necesitan en muchas ocasiones para abordar las investigaciones. Otra de las ventajas que conocemos bien también es la rapidez, la accesibilidad rápida a través de los paneles online, que bueno, es más que comprobado que suele ser la investigación online bastante más ágil, más rápida que otras metodologías. En cuanto al coste, tiene un coste comparativamente menor que otras metodologías, por lo tanto, aquí también entra en juego la rentabilidad y bueno, pues al final que sea asumible, ¿no? El realizar una investigación online por parte de los clientes y de las agencias de investigación, institutos y demás. Y por último, y no menos importante, creo que una de las ventajas más importantes también es el poder adaptar esa experiencia del encuestado a través de las encuestas online, poder tener la capacidad de adaptar las encuestas con diseños variados que fomenten sobre todo la participación, el dinamismo en las respuestas de los participantes y de alguna manera que esto se refleje en la calidad y en la forma de responder de los entrevistados, ¿vale? Pues hasta aquí os he hecho una breve introducción para que conozcáis y poneros en contexto, ¿no? De con quién estáis ahora mismo hablando, con Toluna. Vamos a pasar, voy a dejar paso ahora a Marie Hense. Como os he comentado al inicio, ella es vicepresidenta a nivel europeo de Online Data Quality y ella nos va a hacer un breve recorrido por la investigación la evolución de la investigación de mercados online y nos irá contando también los otros puntos que os he adelantado en la agenda. Gracias. Adelante, Marie.
Great. We're also going to switch to English now. Thank you, Natacha. Today's very much about giving a background and a bit of context about data quality, where we are today in the industry and how we got here, because all of that knowledge is extremely relevant in being able to tackle data quality today and in the future. So what I wanted to start with is a bit of a background on, well, where did data quality and online research come from its start and its birth, so to speak, in the late 90s, all the way up to now? And where is it going? And also, what kind of skills do we as researchers need to tackle data quality, and how do we need to work together in the industry? So let's start with those kind of late 90s, early 2000s. It was the birth of online and the internet. We had only a handful of people that were really able to access it because they had a laptop or a desktop, more desktop back then, to access the internet. And so, of course, it was in its infancy. So that means online research wasn't really happening at a large scale. There was a small volume of online research projects being conducted. And really the challenge that we had during those early years was there was a strong skew in who was replying to online research studies. We had people with higher incomes, and that in turn had a whole skew of other factors like higher income were able to afford a desktop, therefore potentially a skew towards people with certain education. There was also a skew towards people with a certain openness to new technology and early adopters. So there was that psychographic skew as well. So what we had to deal with a lot in those early days was making sure that our studies are as representative as they can be. But then the adoption started broadening. And on the next slide, in those early 2000s, we had a lot more adoption, wider adoption. So in those early 2000s up to 2010, more people started using online, more people started to gain access to the internet. And that meant in turn, actually, we had a lot more studies that happened online in research. We had a higher volume of studies, and we started to see the first online panels being created for respondents. Toluna itself was created around that time, so we as a company are about 25 years old, and we were one of those first in this market. Another thing that we saw as well, though, was we saw a lot of offline studies, so face-to-face studies or telephone studies, move online. And this is where quality challenges started broadening. So we started with representativity challenges, and now in those early 2000s, we started seeing challenges also around the study design, because they weren't adapted from offline methodologies to online, and they are different. They need to be treated differently. However, what we saw is that a lot of studies weren't actually adapted. They were just translated like for like from offline to online. And that, of course, had brought with it a problem of engaging real respondents. So respondent engagement started becoming a challenge here already. And then the third point around challenges that we started seeing, on the previous slide still, we saw the...
Oops.
We're going through the whole history very quickly. So the third point that we saw in those early 2000s was we really saw the beginning of some hyperactivity. So what that means, we had some individual people who realized, hey, I could sign up to a lot of these different panels and I could participate in a lot of research studies. And that way I could make quite a bit of incentives, points, vouchers, whatever that was at that time. But so we started seeing those three. This is where we're starting to build up our picture of quality challenges over the years. So that's where we saw those first hyperactive participants. Now let's move into the 2010s. So what happened online? We saw a really quick uptake of online, especially driven in markets where mobile adoption increased as well. So if we think about APAC region, Africa, LATAM, a lot of people there started gaining access to mobiles, and through the mobiles, they started gaining access to the internet and online. Another thing that happened at the same time is a lot of open source technology. Technology and open code was very widely, starting to become widely available. And so that enabled, in turn, quite a lot of technological development, but also more organized large-scale fraud, not just in research, but across the board, also in banking or, people trying to defraud individuals in other ways. And then another thing that happened at the same time in those 2010s is online entertainment became more varied. So if we think about all of those social media platforms like Facebook, like Instagram and Twitter, if we think about, YouTube, Netflix, WhatsApp, all of those really started gaining speed in those 2010s. What did that mean? Well, now we are competing for people's attention with our surveys against the likes of TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp, because people have lots of things to do online. There is a wide array of entertainment options that they've got to choose from. So we as researchers in the research industry are competing with all of that for people's attention. And what happened in online research at the same time? Incentives became more automated. This is a crucial point, which I'll come back to in a moment, but this automation of incentives really helped drive fraud on a larger scale, because all of a sudden fraudsters could just do surveys and get incentivized right away, and that made it quite appealing for them. Another thing that was important is that the algorithms that we use in research to pair up respondents and surveys weren't as optimized as they are nowadays. So we saw a lot of respondents who were sent to surveys that they didn't qualify for. So for example, if a survey was just looking for females, males would get invited to that survey, and then they would get screened out because obviously they don't fit the criteria. But of course, that would result in quite a lot of frustration on the respondent side, because they were trying to participate in research, but they actually weren't screened in, or they weren't sent relevant surveys. And so that had an impact on respondents' motivation. And then, of course, another thing that we had to take into consideration and that we need to think about is DIY research tools were becoming more prevalent during that time period. And so that meant a lot more research studies were conducted of different styles of writing questionnaires and so on. And so all of this together led to a few more quality challenges that we've got to add to our list. So we already had our potential our representativity that was kind of eased by the broader availability of online. So that was eased there, but we do still have to think about fraud, and what started with individuals being hyperactive now actually in the 2010s became more of an organized global enterprise, really, and it was fueled by those technologies that were available, and it was also fueled by the fact that incentives were now more automated. And then another thing that we started seeing frustrated respondents, and they were frustrated for two reasons. A, because they tried to participate and they maybe weren't able to participate because they weren't sent relevant surveys, but also they saw research studies that were designed in a way that wasn't entertaining for them. It wasn't fun, it wasn't interesting, the surveys were really long, or maybe they were very repetitive or very complicated to understand. And so what we saw is that respondents were dropping off and not participating, or sometimes they would start to try to participate by gaming the surveys a little bit and perhaps bending the truth a little bit to try to participate. And so we're starting to see this picture of quality challenges build up, but all of this now culminated in 2021 and 2022 because COVID happened. So on the next slide, let's have a look at what happened during COVID. So we had the global pandemic, and this was really a bit of a shock to online research, to the world, obviously, but also to online research. So the global pandemic in 2021 and 2022 led to two key things. First one was, again, technology just exploded. All of a sudden, we had to do a lot of things remotely. We had to do a lot more things on our laptops or phone that previously maybe we were able to do face to face. So if we think about the likes of Zoom and other video conferencing tools, for example, they weren't really popular before the pandemic as much as all of a sudden they did become popular during 2021 and 2022. And so a lot of technology was made available freely on the internet. And again, the more technology, also things like AI and large language models, all of that drives and is available to fraudsters as well. So that was one thing. And then the other thing, of course, was there were economic hardships in some countries and for some people, and those people who lost their jobs due to the pandemic were looking for other ways to make a living and an income. And in some cases, that led to them being driven to activities that were potentially fraudulent or trying to exploit online research. So what happened in online research at the same time? Well, we had all of these global pandemic general impacts, but in online research specifically, all of a sudden we had the same thing that happened 20 years ago, which was a lot of offline studies moving online. So face-to-face studies were no longer possible. So a lot of those moved online, and a lot of telephone studies moved online as well, from what we saw. And what happened here is they moved online very quickly, and they weren't necessarily adapted to the online methodology. So again, very long surveys, very big grids, studies that would work well with an interviewer were not really translated into a self-completion methodology. And so we started seeing the same kind of challenges from 20 years ago, where we were seeing studies that were not optimized for the respondent experience, but instead they were just adopted as they were into online. Another thing that happened at the same time is, of course, with this move of a lot of offline studies online, and also companies trying to figure out what people were up to during the pandemic and what they were thinking about, how they were feeling about things, there was a huge increase in demand for online research. And that increase in demand really led to a demand that was almost higher than what the research industry was able to supply during that time. And so that gap offered an opportunity for fraudsters to come in and participate. And of course, all of a sudden, the online research industry became very appealing to fraudsters because there was so much research going on and so many incentives to be made. And so the challenges really of what it all boiled down to is systematic online fraud that was global. So coming not just from local individual people who were trying to take a few surveys. This is actually from organized click farms, and also people using bots. So that open technology that's freely available on the internet is being used to obscure and make it more difficult to detect those fraudsters. And at the same time, we have this counterpart of study design. So this study designs that are not optimized for respondent experience. So that meant a lot of real respondents who were motivated to participate are becoming disengaged, and they're becoming demotivated because the surveys that they are taking aren't that much fun. And they've got lots of other options online of things to do. We talked about TikTok, we talked about WhatsApp. There are so many other things that they could be doing at the same time. So we as an industry are really competing. And what you can see already is how these two things are connected. That systematic that study design for our real respondents. If our real respondents are not having a good time, are not enjoying themselves, they will drop out of the studies and they will not participate. And who fills that gap? Look, fraudsters, basically. So the two are very much connected. We need to tackle them together to be able to get a grip on our data quality. So let's have a really quick look at what's happening right now, kind of 2023, and later we'll have a look at what the future holds. So 2023, I already mentioned artificial intelligence, large language models. So of course, we're seeing a lot of movement on the technology side of things here at the moment. We do still have to consider here as well that technology also means devices that people are using, for example. So we used to see studies being run on desktops, then it moved to smaller laptops, then it moved to tablets, and then a lot of people are using phones now. So a lot of people don't actually have laptops anymore. So when we talk about technology, it's not just this kind of AI technology, it's also how are people participating in surveys? And what devices are they using, for example? How big are the screens? And therefore, what does that mean for our study design? In terms of online research, there are two things. Again, we need to always remember that we're competing for attention for our respondents. So when we design our studies, we need to think not just about the fraudsters and finding out who they are and kicking them out of our research. We need to also think about our real respondents and how we can make this experience good for them. And the other thing is this adjustment in methodologies that comes with different sizes of screens, different attention spans. So knowing when people take surveys, how they participate, and therefore how long the surveys need to retain their attention, for example. So topics of data quality that we've got to keep in mind is still that fraud element that we've got to be aware of, and the technology that's driving that. The competition for respondents' attention, and the study design that enables both of these things. We need to design studies that identify fraudsters but are interesting to take for our real respondents. So we need to always think about both of those sides. So having a look at all of where we came from can help us think about where we need to go to tackle data quality as a whole. So the next slide, as a little summary, we do have to think about all of these things as being connected. Technology and things that we are implementing in terms of incentives, how we design our studies, and how we can make our studies unappealing for fraudsters. We've got to think about all of those things holistically, and we need to work together to tackle those. So let's have a look then, and on the next slide, what do we actually need as researchers to be able to tackle this? Because obviously this is quite a lot of these topics are very varied when we think about, well, AI and research design and figuring out which are the best checks to apply for research. So let's have a look at that. So there are really 4 different kinds of skills that we need to be aware of and how they work together. So one is we need panel experts, people experts really, that know how to motivate respondents and how to keep them engaged to make sure that there's a community of respondents who want to participate in surveys, and we always need to remember they're just humans, and how do we design good research for humans. The other thing we need is, of course, research experts. We do need to design good surveys, good questionnaires for our respondents, and we need to make sure we tackle things or queries like representativity, or how to ask questions effectively. So we definitely need that research expertise. But we do also need experts in technology. So when we talk about bots, when we talk about AI, we do need people that have that background and can work together with the other experts to tackle this from that angle. And then, of course, we do also need experts in analytics. So we need to be able to identify which of the checks that we do are actually effective, or where does the biggest drop-off occur in our survey, and what can we do to tackle that with the way that we design our studies or with the technology that we apply. So at the end of the day, all of these 4 areas of expertise need to work together to tackle data quality holistically. So I brought some examples of how this could work and what this would look like on the next slide. So, for example, research and technology. One thing we need to understand as researchers now is, how do bots work? How do they work? And how could we create surveys that trap bots so that we can identify who is a good respondent and who is potentially a bot respondent. So having that technology input and knowledge about how bots actually work is extremely important, because that will allow us to identify them more effectively in our surveys and in our data analysis. Another example is research and analytics. So we've got to balance the needs of our real motivated respondents and identifying those bad respondents. And so to do that, we need to be really specific with which quality checks we apply as part of our survey. Of course, maybe we'd love to apply 10 quality questions before every survey, but that would be extremely tiring for our real respondents. It may identify a lot of bad respondents, but for our real respondents, by the time they enter our survey, they'd be very exhausted and tired, and they would not be very motivated for the rest of the survey. So what we need to do is we need to combine our research skills and our analytics skills to identify the best quality checks that give us the best balance between identifying the bad respondents, but not having too much of an impact on our real motivated respondents. And then the last example here is, how can we create respondent experiences in our surveys that are motivating for our real respondents? So by combining research expertise and that panel or people expertise, also thinking about, how does human motivation work, and how do we capture people's attention with our surveys? And that is something we always need to keep thinking about. Our real respondents, we must not forget about them in all of this focus on the bad respondents either. Because as we saw earlier, they are connected. The less real motivated respondents we've got, the more of an opportunity there is for bad respondents to swoop in. So on the next slide, as a little bit of background data, I wanted to just showcase a little bit of what I just said. So on the left, you can see in green on the top, our post-field clean-out rates. This is from 2023, Toluna data, global. So we had a look at how is length of interview, in this case, connected to clean-out rates and dropout rates. And we could see a clear connection of the higher or the LOI, so the longer the survey, the higher the post-field clean-out rates. And that's because people get demotivated, they lose focus, and they're more likely towards the end of a survey to fall into trap questions, for example. But there is that clear connection. And I also had a look at, well, what happens at the same time to our dropout rates or our abandonment rates. And we could see the same, maybe not as steep, but we do see a clear tendency. The longer the survey, the more likely a respondent is to drop out. And again, like I said earlier, there is that connection between respondents dropping out, and that means there's a gap that needs to be filled. More respondents come in, and there's a potential there for problems with data quality. So just wanted to share some of this data in the background. And so in summary, on the next slide, we do have to work on things together. So now, of course, I talked a lot about research design, but actually we do know that research quality needs to be tackled holistically. And we said it's connected, right? The research design together with the quality of the respondents. And I wanted to just give a few examples here of what we do at Toluna in terms of ensuring the quality of our respondents. And we've got 3 categories really of checks that we do on all of our respondents. And the categories are roughly device checks, behavioral checks, and identity checks. So device checks is everything that has to do with a respondent's laptop or desktop or mobile or tablet, whatever they're using. And it's all about identifying, are there any suspicious device settings that would make us doubt the quality of this respondent. So that includes things like geolocation, language settings, time zone settings, whether they're using a suspicious IP address, whether they're using auto translators, for example. So all of these kind of device settings. Our second category of checks is all around behavior. So we monitor behavioral elements such as, straight liners, speeders, attention question fails, but we also look at things like, for example, whether respondents use copy and paste in their open-ended answers, whether they are overstating, so if they're very positive, for example, or we also use language comprehension questions, and we also track all of our panelists over time to see whether they are consistent in their answers. For example, in the gender question, ideally, a respondent should always say that they're the same gender and not swap genders every questionnaire that they take. So that kind of longitudinal tracking of their behavior. And then the last category of checks that we apply are identity checks. And at the moment, that comprises digital fingerprinting, for example. It also comprises of personal information like name, email address, date of birth, information like that. And we use that to deduplicate our respondents and create an individual profile for each of our respondents to use for tracking and to use to allocate to their individual profile. So what that means in summary, really, on the next slide is we need to, again, combine forces across the research industry. We need to combine our research skills, our knowledge about people and psychology, our knowledge about analytics, and our knowledge about technology. We need to combine all of that between the researchers, between the panel providers to create good data quality. And all of us have a role to play in this to tackle data quality. So let's have a look then what that means for the future of data quality and where we're going and what we need to do. Obviously, this is a moving target and things change. So we're looking at kind of the broad future and the short-term future. So on the next slide,
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Natacha. In terms of online research, we are seeing a lot of movement in terms of technology, right? So we are seeing a lot of movement on the AI front in terms of automation, large language models like ChatGPT, and how that is being used in some cases against the research industry. But we are also seeing a lot of movement in terms of technology. We're going back to flip phones now, where you can fold your phone and it's got a bigger screen again. So there's a lot of technology development happening that will and can have an impact on the data quality and research in general. But we are also seeing, again, more entertainment that's happening online. So more competition for our respondents' time and attention. So we do always need to keep that on the radar. So a few general topics that we'll need to keep in mind for the next few months and years for online data quality is, first of all, fraud isn't going to go away anytime soon. So we need to continue tackling and fighting against fraud, especially considering now topics like AI, and to continue our innovation and identification of fraudulent respondents. We need to also find that balance between identifying fraud and keeping the experience for our real motivated respondents high. So without them, they're the backbone of our research. So we need to always keep our real respondents in mind. With all the talk that's going on about fraud, and it has to go on, we must not forget about our real respondents. We need to also think about, how does respondents' reality change, as in where do they take surveys, what kind of devices do they use, and what does that mean for our study design? For example, more and more people are using mobiles to participate in surveys and to do pretty much anything. The penetration of desktops and laptops has been decreasing, and especially in some markets like India, for example, that's a mobile first market. Any study that is only compatible and only optimized for a desktop or a laptop will miss out on a huge number of respondents, and it will be skewed towards people who can afford a laptop or a desktop. And so we have to think about those things as well from a methodology perspective, and how that impacts the representativity of the data that we collect. So I wanted to give you a few examples on the next slide about some things that we're doing at Toluna to currently work on and be prepared for what's around the corner in terms of data quality. So obviously we are basing a lot of our innovation and investing a lot in analytics and technology. So that means automating things via algorithms, using artificial intelligence, trialing different ways of using artificial intelligence for ourselves for our benefit. So to identify fraudulent respondents, but also to improve the quality of the research on our platforms on a whole. Another thing that's extremely important, and I think this has come out of the previous slides already, is the collaboration around data quality is absolutely crucial. Data quality, and especially topics like fraud, aren't a topic that one company or one person can solve individually. And so as an industry, we are working together. And for us at Toluna, this is extremely important. And so we are involved with a lot of initiatives that are led by industry bodies such as SMR or the Market Research Society in the UK to collaborate and learn and be at the forefront of what happens in terms of data quality. Another thing that we are trialing at the moment is to see what we can learn from other industry outside of the market research industry. So, for example, trialing biometric identity verification, which is used in a lot of other industries such as banking, and that could be interesting for the research industry as well. Of course, artificial intelligence is extremely important, so we do need to continue our work as an industry, and we do continue our work at Toluna to optimize our identification of artificial intelligence, for example, in open questions. And another thing is that moving target, fraud and bad behavior in surveys moves and changes. It doesn't always look the same. And so what we need to work on and what we continuously work on as a company is to revise and improve the quality checks that we use to identify bad respondents. For example, a few years ago, a bad respondent would provide gibberish, so like just random letters in an open end. But today, actually, what we're seeing open-ended answers that are too good because they are written by artificial intelligence. So it's almost the opposite of what we used to see. And so we, of course, continue to be on top of those developments and developing quality checks that identify those bad respondents. And then, of course, we do continue to work on all of our suite of quality checks. So whether that's our device checks, our behavioral checks, or our identity checks. But there are also a few things that you can think about and that you can share with your colleagues on the next slide. So especially when it comes to research design. So first of all, let's always keep the respondent experience top of mind when we design our questions. Let's think about the length of interview and the optimizing our surveys to different devices like mobiles or laptops, for example. But also when we think about how can we reduce the frustration that respondents may feel when they try to participate in a study, but they can't qualify for it. In the online world, of course, has great opportunity there because we profile a lot of our respondents. My recommendation and encouragement here is to use our profiles where we can to create that good respondent experience. So if we've got a study that's only for males, we shouldn't be sending it to women because they will not qualify. And so always keeping in mind that respondent experience is absolutely crucial. The other thing is to think about, well, how can we make research and fraud more difficult for the fraudsters? The fraudsters are trying to make a quick money. They're trying to just get into the survey, go through the survey, get their incentive. And the more difficult we make it for them as researchers, the more they will leave us alone because we're not appealing anymore. We're not easy enough to make a quick incentive. So a few things, and these are just examples, but we need to think about, well, we need to hide the topic of the research. If it's too obvious, then the fraudster just comes in, they know exactly how to qualify, and then they can just go straight into the survey. So we do need to think about that in our filtering and in our screening in the beginning of the survey, how we can hide and make it less obvious so that a fraudster can't immediately say, oh, yes, I have to say yes here, and then I'll be in. So we need to make it difficult. Another thing is logic checks. Fraudsters, and especially bots and they don't think about what they answer, they just answer. So they don't answer coherently and consistently. So logic checks are still one of the best ways of identifying bad respondents. So an example for that could be someone who says they're 15 years old, but they've got 10 children, for example. It's possible, but it's not very probable. Another thing is copy and paste detection, which is something that all of our surveys have on Toluna Start as well, but also all of our Confirm It surveys. We do need to identify those kinds of behaviors because those are very clearly linked to the usage of artificial intelligence and those kind of bots. So those kinds of checks are extremely important. And then another thing is to mix up attention questions, rather than just using those really obvious attention questions. Something like a fake brand, for example, works quite well. So if you've got a brand list, just adding a fake brand on there, because again, the fraudsters, they don't actually think about their answers and they don't actually know the brands. They don't read, they just click through. And so they don't necessarily know that a brand is fake. So we need to be prepared for these kinds of situations. And then, of course, the last topic, and with that, I'd like to close, is do challenge your providers. Speak to us about what we do. Obviously, I only had so much time today, so I wasn't able to go into a lot of detail, but understand what panel providers are doing, what your different research partners are doing, and understand what they do in terms of device checks, behavioral checks, identity checks, and keep the conversation going around data quality, because obviously we need to tackle it together. Like we said in those slides previously, it's something that we need to tackle holistically, with all of us playing our part. And so with that, I will hand it back over to Natacha for questions.
Muchas gracias, Marie. Gracias. Pues como veis aquí, efectivamente, esto es una cuestión de abordar juntos los diferentes actores en la investigación online, abordar juntos la calidad de los datos como industria. Hasta aquí, hemos finalizado el contenido del webinar. Quiero abrir brevemente una sesión de preguntas, si alguien tiene alguna cuestión. Igualmente, si queréis, también hay posibilidad, por supuesto, de que nos mandéis un correo tanto a Marie como a mí para pedir más información, para agendar una llamada y profundizar en cualquier aspecto que os haya quedado alguna duda o alguna cuestión. Voy a dejar de compartir por si alguno de vosotros escribe en el chat, si no, con la pantalla no os podré ver. Dame un segundito. Okay. Vale. Miro un momentito si tenemos preguntas. Creo que por aquí... Vale, sí, compartiremos la presentación. Ha habido una pregunta simplemente para saber si compartiremos. Pues si no hay más preguntas, muchísimas gracias a todos por vuestro tiempo, por vuestra atención. Gracias, Marie, por acompañarnos hoy y darnos toda esta información tan útil e imprescindible para los profesionales de investigación.
Natasha, I think there was actually a question just now.
Sí. Vamos con ello entonces.
Yes, okay, so we are currently trialing and testing biometric identification. So obviously this is, I think it was Raquel who asked it. So we are trialing this at the moment. We don't have it in place currently, but we are identifying how we can apply it for our respondents. Again, it's used a lot in banking. But in banking, we, of course, do see a lot of people who are willing to go through these kinds of checks because they want to protect their bank accounts. In online research, again, we need to take into consideration how do we balance the needs of identifying bad respondents, fraudulent respondents, with the needs of our real respondents. And we need to see whether real respondents are willing to participate in this kind of biometric check. So it's about finding that balance. And so we are trying to find that balance at the moment to figure out what exactly that should look like.
Gracias, Marie. Esta pregunta viene en relación a, bueno, una cuestión, o sea, esta respuesta a una cuestión que nos han lanzado, que es: ¿aplicáis ya en Toluna la identificación biométrica con vuestros panelistas? Esto sería una solución para evitar usuarios no humanos. Y aquí nos ha respondido Marie. Tenemos otra pregunta, que es si hemos hablado del método de captación de los panelistas de Toluna y si hay alguna forma de hacer las preguntas por voz. Marie, si quieres, método de captación, recruitment methods for our panelists.
Yes, so the recruitment of our panelists, thank you, Natacha. We've got a really wide network of different recruitment partners that we use. So online, it's our proprietary network. And that means we recruit respondents from all different kinds of channels, whether that is social media, different social media channels, whether that's different websites, whether that is different forums. So we really recruit from all of the different types of channels that you can imagine online. And that is important for us because we want to make sure that the base of respondents that we've got within Toluna is as diverse as possible. So that's why for us, we have a very diverse and broad range of partners that we use for recruitment. And we've got a recruitment team specifically focused on this. And so we do all of this in-house with a network of partners.
And can we do the questions through the voice?
Is that within a survey?
Creo que sí. Pregunta, ¿hay forma de hacer las preguntas por voz? Entiendo que es
within the survey. Yes.
Sí.
We need to check that with our research team, but I do believe we've got video answers already, so there's probably an option of doing that with voice answers only. The question was more about whether the question could be asked in person.
Vale. Sí, creo que puedes hablar. Dame un segundo y te confirmo. Vale, también preguntan si tenemos algún tipo de control de calidad en las preguntas abiertas.
We do in our own surveys that we program and host ourselves. So if a survey is programmed by us, either on Confirm It or on Toluna Start, yes, we've got a whole range of automated open-ended checks. So our automated open-ended checks use natural language processing algorithms, and they identify automatically things like gibberish, so random letters. Also, we automatically identify foreign language. We also automatically identify duplication of open ends, and we also identify the copy and paste detection that I talked about. So we do have those if the survey is programmed and hosted by us, yes.
Creo que no hay ninguna otra cuestión. Gracias, Marie.
I think there was another from...
vale, espera, no veo si...
Raquel, which was about if you program your own surveys,
vale.
you also have the behavioral questions, if I understand that question correctly.
Si programamos nosotros el cuestionario y recibimos directamente las respuestas en nuestro servidor, en este lado, del lado de la agencia, podéis también en estos casos hacer controles de comportamiento que hemos explicado.
Yeah, so the behavioral checks. When you script your own survey, then we're not able to apply any in-survey or post-field checks because you are hosting your survey yourself, so we don't actually have access to all of the responses that happen in survey and post-field. We do, of course, use the knowledge that we have from our own surveys to evaluate the quality of all of our respondents. And so any respondents who are not providing good answers in other surveys, they wouldn't be sent to your surveys. However, we can't apply our open-ended checks, for example, to your open-ends because you're hosting them yourselves in your own environment. So currently that is not possible, no.
Gracias, Marie. No sé si queda alguna pregunta por ahí que nos dejemos en el tintero. Creo que... José Luis, creo que no te podemos dar acceso al micro, pero si quieres voy leyendo. ¿Qué cantidad de panelistas hay en el panel de español de Toluna? ¿Qué regiones de España creen que tienen peor representadas y qué edades? Si te parece bien, José Luis, podemos darte más información relacionada con todos los tamaños de nuestros paneles, tanto en España como en el resto de mercados donde trabajamos, distribución, tamaños, para darte respuesta a estas cuestiones. Gracias. Pues creo, si no me equivoco, voy a mirar la parte de preguntas. Sí, compartiremos han vuelto a preguntar, insisto, compartiremos la presentación. De hecho, el webinar queda grabado, por lo cual podréis volverlo a visualizar para cualquier duda que haya quedado. Y, por supuesto, en la presentación tenéis nuestros correos, tanto de Marie como el mío, para cualquier otra duda o cuestión que os surja. Nos podéis escribir y os ayudaremos encantadas. Muy bien, pues muchísimas gracias y nada, gracias por vuestro tiempo. Gracias, un saludo.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Gracias, Marie.